You know, there are some things that hold just an incredible amount of history. Not just antiques, but things that have literally seen centuries. Today, we're going to talk about royal jewels. But not just any jewels. The ones that belong to Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria didn't just wear jewels. She, in a way, redefined what they meant. Some were very personal gifts from a beloved husband, things that reminded her of family. And some were pure politics, commissioned after upsetting losses or specifically to cement the image of the crown in public memory. Over time, she gathered more than just a collection. She created an entire system, a system that still influences how the British monarchy presents itself today. And it all began with a courtroom, and a royal collection from which jewels were literally taken, so much so that some existing tiaras even had to be remodeled. Want to know how that happened? Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. Not all losses in the history of the crown happen on the battlefield. In Queen Victoria's case, one of the most significant defeats unfolded in a courtroom, and its traces remained not in treaties, but in emptied jewel boxes. It all started after the death of her uncle, King William IV, in 1837. For over a century, the crowns of Great Britain and Hanover had been united. British monarchs were also rulers of Hanover. But when Victoria ascended the British throne, this personal union ended. Why? Hanover followed Salic law, meaning women could not inherit the throne. So the Hanoverian crown passed to her uncle, Ernest Augustus. Years later, the Hanoverian royal house filed a claim for a collection of jewels that had once belonged to Queen Charlotte, Victoria's grandmother. Charlotte considered these items part of the Hanoverian family estate. For decades, they remained in Britain, but the case was finally settled in 1857. British judges ruled, yes, these jewels did indeed belong to the House of Hanover. As a result, Victoria was required to return a large number of jewels, including those long associated with her royal image. This wasn't just a personal loss. It was a powerful symbol. She complied with the ruling. Of course she was upset, but guess what? She didn't let this event set the tone. Instead of pursuing further legal action, Victoria responded with tradition. In the following years, she began commissioning new jewels, not copies, but thoughtful replacements. And these weren't just jewels. They were a statement of continuity. Here's one of the most striking examples. A set of 3 diamond bow brooches, created in that same year, 1858. You've likely seen one of them. Queen Elizabeth II wore them very often, usually one at a time. But Queen Alexandra and Queen Mary, conversely, loved wearing all 3 together in a vertical row for formal events. Their design seems simple, symmetrical bows made entirely of diamonds, but the timing of their creation wasn't accidental. They were made just months after the court's decision. Victoria never publicly explained their symbolism, but their role as replacements is confirmed by sources. And in 1901, she officially declared them heirlooms of the crown, so they would forever remain with the reigning monarch. And you know, the loss even affected important and valuable royal jewels. Among them was Queen Charlotte's diamond necklace, which also had to be returned. So in 1858, Victoria commissioned Garrard to create replacements for these lost items, including what we now know as the Coronation Necklace and earrings. They were made by Garrard jewelers. The necklace consists of gradually increasing diamonds, and at the center is the famous Lahore diamond. Interestingly, the stones for the necklace were taken from old garter badges and even the hilt of a sword. And the pear-shaped diamonds for the earrings were once part of the armlet for the Koh-i-Noor diamond. That's quite a history these stones have. Although this set was commissioned by Victoria, it was first worn at a coronation by Queen Alexandra in 1902. And since then, every queen, Mary, the Queen Mother, Elizabeth II, and now Queen Camilla. Can you imagine how many coronations they've witnessed? What connects the bow brooches and the coronation set? Not just their sparkle, but their purpose. They became part of a larger response, not to recover what was taken, but to reassert identity through new creations. The court took away some old heirlooms, but Victoria responded not with protest, but with creation of new ones, creation of her own legacy. So, we've seen how Victoria turned loss into the creation of new legacy. Now let's look at another side at jewels that appeared not because of court cases, but because of love, devotion, and personal memories. When Queen Victoria is remembered today, it's often as the eternal widow, veiled in black, majestic, unshakably composed. That image, powerful as it is, conceals a completely different Victoria, a younger woman not yet broken by grief, but full of tenderness, devoted, open, and at times quietly radiant. It is this more personal side of the Queen that still lives on in the jewels she received from Prince Albert. They were genuine stories of feeling. Albert was much more than just the Queen's husband. He was her collaborator and friend. He was involved in everything from taste in fashion to state affairs and even jewelry design. Unlike many royal husbands of his time, he didn't just buy presents. He sketched, chose stones, and worked closely with jewelers. He created things with intention, not just according to fashion. One of the most iconic is the sapphire and diamond brooch that he gave her on February 9, 1840, the eve of their wedding. Today, it's known as Prince Albert's brooch. At the time, it was a personal gift from fiancé to bride. Victoria wore it the next day on her wedding gown. At the center of the brooch is a deep blue sapphire framed by 12 round diamonds, all set in gold. Its elegance lies in its simplicity. Victoria wore it all her life, even after Albert's death in 1861. It wasn't just a symbol of mourning, but a delicate thread connecting her public role with private memories. One might ask, why did such a personal item end up in the list of state jewels? Because Victoria decided to make it an heirloom of the crown. In doing so, she gave personal sentiment an official form, so it would be worn not just by her descendants, but by future reigning queens. This brooch has been worn by Queen Alexandra, Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and now Queen Camilla. Each appearance, as if without words, tells of that personal bond which continues through the centuries. Another gift from Albert, less famous but no less meaningful, is a pair of pearl drop earrings from 1847. Each earring is a single pear-shaped pearl, suspended from diamonds. The design is delicate and thoughtful. Victoria often wore them in her later years, with tiaras, order sashes, and even mourning dress. She also included them in the list of heirlooms of the crown. True, they fell out of use during the early 20th century, as shorter earrings came into fashion. But Queen Elizabeth II brought them back to public life. She often wore them together with other Victorian jewels, for example, with the Coronation Necklace and the George IV State Diadem, especially at ceremonies like the state opening of Parliament. These two jewels, the brooch and the earrings, are different from many other royal treasures. They weren't created to project the might of the empire or strengthen alliances. These weren't commissions of power. They were gifts. Personal, specific, and so enduring. So, we've seen how the personal became part of the state. Now, let's look at another category of jewels, those created not for memory or love, but for image, for legacy. Queen Victoria expertly distinguished between the personal and the public, but occasionally she deliberately blurred that line, especially through her jewelry. Some pieces she wore not just for their beauty, but for their significance. One such piece is the golden Jubilee necklace, presented to Victoria in 1888. Interestingly, it wasn't planned at all initially. In 1887, ladies from high society raised money for a monument to Prince Albert. They raised much more than was needed. Arguments began. Some wanted to donate the surplus to charity, while others proposed buying a gift for the Queen. After nearly a year of discussions, a compromise was reached. A diamond and pearl necklace was commissioned from Carrington and Company. The design combined opulence and restraint, removable elements, symmetrical lines, a central pearl drop. Exactly what Victoria liked in her mature years. She valued it so much that she also made it an heirloom of the crown. A century later, it became one of the main jewels for Queen Elizabeth II's ceremonies, especially at the state opening of Parliament. She wore it for her very first, and it seems, her very last state opening of Parliament. This necklace became her signature piece for this important ceremony. Another example is the Indian circlet, conceived by Prince Albert in 1853 and inspired by Indian motifs. Initially, it was set with opals, Albert's favorite gemstones. But then Queen Alexandra ordered the opals to be replaced with rubies, reportedly because she considered opals unlucky. Interestingly, the circlet is also connected to the history of the Hanoverian dispute. After some jewels had to be returned in 1857, the circlet also needed to be remodeled. Part of the original diamonds were removed and replaced. Victoria herself rarely wore this circlet in public. It truly became famous in the 20th century, when Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, made it one of her favorite jewels. She wore it constantly, even after her daughter became queen. The circlet came into Queen Elizabeth II's full possession in 2002 after her mother's death, and she wore it just once at a state banquet in Malta in 2005. What an amazing fate for a jewel that her mother loved so much. Another jewel connected to this transition and rubies is the crown ruby parure. It also appeared in 1854 and also featured opals. They were fashionable then, but some considered them unlucky. Then Queen Alexandra replaced the opals with rubies, and it immediately looked more vibrant and formal. Although initially a personal gift from Albert, the parure eventually became an heirloom of the crown and should have passed to Elizabeth II in 1952. But Queen Elizabeth II allowed her mother to continue wearing it at state events. After her death in 2002, the set came into Queen Elizabeth II's full possession, and she also occasionally wore its elements. Another, less famous but very interesting jewel is the Cockade brooch. It is listed as an heirloom of the crown. Originally, it was most likely a diamond-studded cockade, something like an ornament for a gentleman's hat. Later, it was remodeled for Queen Alexandra, possibly as a three-part cloak clasp. What's most interesting is that this brooch likely appeared at the coronations of three queens. Queen Alexandra, Queen Mary, and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, wore it for their ceremonies in 1902, 1911, and 1937. Queen Mary, it seems, wore the full version of the brooch, including the side elements, which haven't been seen since her time. What we see on public display today is just the central part, a large circular rosette. Queen Elizabeth II wore it for state banquets, for example, during the South Korean president's visit in 2013. This brooch appears rarely, but when it does, it's simply impossible to miss. It's bold, striking, and eye-catching. Another solemn brooch, less often discussed, is the diamond and pearl brooch. It is listed as an heirloom of the crown and was left by Queen Victoria. Its exact origin is a bit hazy, but Queen Victoria included it in the list of heirlooms of the crown. It was regularly worn by the Queen Mother, and it reappeared in public use after 2002. Queen Elizabeth II wore it for significant moments, for example, for a service for troops who were stationed in Afghanistan and other important daytime and evening engagements. And finally, the Diamond Jubilee brooch, created in 1897 to mark the 60th year of Victoria's reign. It was a gift from her royal household. She called it beautiful and included it as an heirloom of the crown. This brooch became a true favorite of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and historians say she wore it more often than any other brooch, keeping it with her until her death in 2002. Queen Elizabeth II wore it several times after that, for example, during visits abroad in 2010, but not as often as her mother did. From a necklace that came about from surplus money to a brooch remodeled from something like military fashion, these jewels tell one common story. The public image of the monarchy is created not only through words and ceremonies, but also through such timeless symbols. They form a kind of visual language of sovereignty that speaks across generations without uttering a word. You know, in the royal collection, the boundary between personal item and state treasure has never been completely fixed. Some jewels started as personal keepsakes, but over time took on a more public role. Not by royal decree, but simply by their continued presence. They became part of the visual memory of the crown. One of the earliest examples is the Kent Amethyst Demi-Parure. It dates back to the early 19th century and belonged to Queen Victoria's mother. It's a set featuring deep violet amethysts framed by diamonds, a necklace, earrings, 3 brooches, and a pair of hair combs. After her mother's death in 1861, the parure passed to Queen Victoria, and she later included it in the heirlooms of the crown. The full set has rarely been seen in public. Queen Elizabeth II wore it as a complete ensemble just once. That was at a state banquet in Portugal in 1984. Much more often, we see a single brooch from this set, a shell-shaped brooch with a large amethyst at its center. It became a constant element of her wardrobe for many official daytime engagements. She wore it for a visit to the United States in 1991, for her 40th accession anniversary in 1992, and for many other recent daytime events, like Commonwealth Day services or the Epsom Derby. Amethyst, by the way, is often considered a stone of mourning, which is why the brooch was often chosen for relevant events. Another historic item from the heirlooms list is Queen Adelaide's brooch, made in 1831 for the consort of King William IV. Initially, it was a clasp for a multi-strand pearl necklace, but later it began to be worn as a standalone brooch. The design is quite substantial, yet elegant, a large central stone surrounded by diamonds. After Queen Adelaide's death, the brooch passed to Queen Victoria and was then passed down through the royal line. It was worn by Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II wore it with pearls for a Commonwealth Day service, and memorably, at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in London in 2012. Yes, the very same brooch she wore in the famous sketch with James Bond. Also from Queen Adelaide's collection are the Wheat Ear Brooches. It's a set of 6 diamond sprays in the shape of wheat ears, commissioned by William IV in the 1830s. They passed to Victoria and have since appeared, though infrequently, on her successors. Queen Elizabeth II wore a pair during a visit to Oman in 2010, and in 2018, Princess Eugenie used several of them as hair ornaments at her wedding reception. Very unusual and beautiful. Among the oldest heirlooms in the collection are 2 pearl necklaces linked to queens of the early 18th century. One of 46 pearls is presumed to have belonged to Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch. The second, slightly longer, with 50 pearls, is attributed to Queen Caroline, wife of King George II. They were listed in Victoria's 1896 jewelry inventory and later also became heirlooms of the crown. In 1947, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth gave these necklaces to their daughter, Princess Elizabeth, as a wedding gift. And you know what happened the morning of the wedding? The necklaces were on display with other gifts, and they were forgotten. The princess's private secretary rushed to fetch them. To make it in time, he literally had to commandeer the King of Norway's car, and then even run on foot through the crowds. This isn't so much royal drama as it is an illustration of how hectic court life can be. Queen Elizabeth II wore these necklaces several times in public, including for her Diamond Jubilee concert in 2012. The fact that they continue to be worn connects today with the monarchy's earliest visual traditions. Although these jewels were not created as state regalia, many have become an integral part of the royal tradition. Some royal jewels were never intended as gifts or personal keepsakes. They immediately belonged to a different category, created for official appearances, to be worn in public as part of the monarchy's ceremonial vocabulary. One of the most prominent examples is the George IV state diadem, commissioned in 1820 from jewelers Rundell, Bridge and Rundell. Initially, it was designed for the monarch's procession to Westminster. It features over 1,300 diamonds with pearls along the edge, and the design features symbols of England, Scotland, and Ireland: roses, thistles, and shamrocks. After George IV, it passed to Queen Adelaide, and later Queen Victoria wore it and made it part of official use. Since then, it has been worn by every reigning queen and queen consort. Queen Elizabeth II first appeared in it at the state opening of Parliament in 1952, and then wore it on her way to her coronation in 1953. It remained part of her official regalia throughout her life and became closely associated with the very image of the British monarchy. And, as we know, Queen Camilla has continued this tradition. The diamond festoon necklace, created much later, is also linked to Queen Victoria's long-term influence. In 1950, King George VI commissioned Garrard to create a new necklace for Princess Elizabeth, using diamonds that Victoria had specifically left as heirlooms for future use by the crown. The result was a beautiful necklace of 3 rows of diamonds. Elizabeth II wore this necklace regularly for state banquets and receptions, very often with the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. A less conspicuous but historically significant item is Queen Victoria's diamond bracelet, made in 1838. It consists of 5 articulated sections featuring a foliage pattern. It's sometimes confused with other bracelets from that era, but this specific one was officially designated an heirloom of the crown. It appeared in official portraits and ceremonial photographs, often worn discreetly under gloves or cuffs, a consistent, though quiet, element of formal dress. I've always found it amazing how much history is held, not in grand events, but in what seem like small details: a clasp, a stone, the way a brooch is worn. With Queen Victoria's jewels, the meaning often isn't in what was said about them, but in how they simply kept appearing. Year after year, passing from one queen to the next, they became silent witnesses and participants in history. Looking back at these jewels, was there anything that surprised you? Maybe you'd seen something before but never noticed the story standing behind the sparkle? If this kind of close-up history interests you, where subtle details, long timelines, and how meaning hides in plain sight are important, I hope you'll stick with the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming up, and I'd love to share it with you. Don't forget to subscribe and give a like if you enjoyed this journey into the world of royal jewels.